Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, some new insight on the impeachment inquiry of President Trump that you don't want to miss. It has to do with the history of impeachments that may help us figure out where this one might be going. Lawyer and SVSU political science professor Julie Keil is with us tonight to break it all down. Plus, Julie will also have some perspective on the impact of using foreign leaders to influence our political process. And that's not all. We have a serious mental health crisis in our state and our country, for that matter. Matt Samocki from the Great Lakes Bay Region Mental Health Partnership is with us to talk about the crisis and what's being done locally to help. But first, we have a reaction from last week's program here on the follow-up. One of our viewers called our hotline to voice concern about Governor Whitmer's cut to the Pure Michigan campaign. The viewer hopes it doesn't change the warm welcome she gets during her travels, like she received coming back from a trip to Canada recently.
Hi, this is Dot in Bay City. I'm calling in regard to the segment about Governor Whitmer's recent action, and I would like to share with you that this last Saturday I was returning from a trip. We returned through the Blue Water Bridge back into Michigan from Canada, and we stopped at the very first rest stop right next to the Pure Michigan sign. We were greeted very nicely by the employees who work there, who offered us brochures about our great state and a new map of the state as well. I hope that the rest stops in our state will continue to be enforced, because they're certainly a very welcome sight when we return from Canada. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dot, for calling in, and we want to hear from more of you to help drive the conversation here on the follow-up. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook and Twitter. You can also dial into our follow-up hotline, as Dot just did. And if you'd like to see any of our past shows, just log in to deltabroadcasting.org. Up first, Julie Keil is with us, political science professor at SVSU and a lawyer. You have a unique perspective on this impeachment inquiry, both from historical and procedural. I think let's start with procedural, because there's a lot of twists and turns, particularly just today. The Trump administration told the Democrats, you know, we're not cooperating because there's no due process. You're just making up as you go along. And that's where we stand. So where are you with that?
Well, and I think that is the most interesting issue that's going on right now.
Sure.
And we'll talk about it a little bit, but I just want to kind of give a little bit of a background, because there's a lot of misconceptions about what impeachment's all about and how the procedure works and what the Constitution says. And the Constitution actually provides for impeachment, and it says very clearly that they basically did not trust the people of the United States, because they were the people elected the people in the House, and then the states elected the senators. So they wanted to leave the final decision as to whether or not to remove somebody from office in the hands of the better people, the senators who were actually elected by the states. So that gives a little bit of a perspective as to how they really didn't care about what the people thought about what was going on. The Constitution itself only has 3 requirements. One, that the impeachment and the removal from office has to happen by an oath or affirmation. 2, that there is a supermajority that has to vote for it in the Senate. So in other words, if the House decides to find and to impeach the president or any other officer, then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate has to vote 67 to 67 out of 100 senators have to vote in favor of removing the president from office, or any person from office. That's a supermajority, and that's done because they really, again, not trust leaving too much power in the hands of any one person or any one group of people, figuring, well, if you had 67 people, you'd have to have a big enough majority within the Senate to do that. And then the last part of it is that the person who presides over the actual removal of office, the Senate part of it, is the Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. So the Senate doesn't actually preside over it, because otherwise the Vice President would be presiding. And in order to keep that sort of partisanship out, the Chief Justice actually presides over it. What's interesting is there's nothing about due process in it. Nowhere does it say what you're supposed to do, what the procedure is supposed to be. Do you have the right to subpoena people? Do you have the right to confront witnesses?
Sure.
And it's been a controversial issue, obviously, as it is with President Trump over the years. And the result of it is there have been 16 impeachments in the history of the United States at the federal level. Most of those have been of district court judges. One was of a senator. One was the Secretary of War, so some interesting different groups of people
Sure.
that have been impeached. And in all of those cases, the allegations were really kind of vague, but the procedures are even vaguer. So the Senate can set whatever rules it wants to. There is no requirement as to what they have to do in order to remove somebody from office. Recently, the Senate has decided they want to do it by a committee that does the trial, actually, rather than the full Senate doing it. So both sides have the right to put on witnesses. Both sides have the right to testify themselves and to confront each other. But they do that with a smaller group of people from the Senate. And then the Senate then does a summary of what happens and makes a recommendation. And then the entire transcript of that trial is then given to the entire Senate and they vote on it. So it's not like, it doesn't look like real due process in American law.
And the fact that President Trump does not want to cooperate, is that in itself an impeachable offense, or he just runs the risk of saying, okay, I probably have something to hide?
Well,
right?
It's like, try to imagine saying, I've decided I would prefer not to be tried by the court. So although I may have, I don't know, murdered somebody or committed another crime or a civil infraction, I don't recognize the power of the court to try me or the Senate to try me. So I'm just going to pick up my toys and go home, and you can't stop me. And of course, that's not going to be allowed. There's going to have to be some sort of a coming to grips with this at some point. And I believe it is obstruction of justice, because not only has he said he's not going to cooperate, but he's stopping other witnesses from being able to cooperate as well. There was a witness who was supposed to be coming in today, had their plane tickets all set, they were to fly in today, and he stopped them from being able to testify. So that's going to end at some point. And that, I believe, does create a whole new, and again, it's my belief. I'm not saying that I am an expert on this topic in terms
Sure.
of what it takes to be an impeachable offense, but it seems like obstruction of justice clearly is going to fall under an impeachable offense.
And of course, it appears the Democrats would like to put this on a fast track. They want to get people in, they want to get this done, some say by Thanksgiving. That's unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole idea, it's a bit of a smokescreen. They want to sort of undo the 2016 election and set the tone for the 2020,
that's
right?
what the Republicans are saying. And
Yeah.
actually, I disagree that the Democrats are trying to do this quickly. They actually are taking the tactic that once they start the process, it's going to be hard to get any more information. And kind of an interesting little tidbit that I think the viewers might be interested in is the fact that in the House, the minority party does not have the right to subpoena witnesses and force them to come in and testify. So when the House does their investigation, it can all be done on the behest of what the Democrats want to hear. The House is going to have no chance to actually produce any sort of witnesses that are contrary to what the Democratic Party is saying. This happens because in 2015, the Republicans, which held a majority in the House at that time, passed a rule that said that the minority party no longer has the power to subpoena people. So it's coming back to bite them, because that was their choice. They were warned at the time by the Democratic Party that was going to come back to bite them at the point that, you know, the other party took over. And so the reality of it is that Nancy Pelosi can sit back and she can subpoena people. She can bring people in to testify. She can get court orders to force testimony. And there's really nothing that the Republican Party can do about it. So I think she would really be foolish to try to push it to go too quickly, because they're uncovering more things every day. And this newest interference with witnesses testifying, I think, may become the newest issue that could be, even if there's nothing else, could be an impeachable offense.
Interesting. What goes around comes around, related to what the Republicans did in 2015. It's funny how that works.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating.
On a related note, changing gears a little bit from the inquiry, but the focus of this inquiry has to do with the phone call that President Trump made to the Ukrainian president, supposedly asking him to find dirt on a political rival, meaning Joe Biden or the Biden family. The issue about that, too, is sort of difficult, because the Democrats have told we want more transparency when it comes to these kind of conversations with foreign leaders. And on top of that, the president said, well, I think China should investigate the Bidens and anybody else.
That's as transparent as you can get, because he did that, you know, in a news conference.
But some of these conversations for national security, while transparency is good to a certain extent, some of these conversations have to remain private. So where are we with sort of these foreign leaders being asked to sort of influence political leaders in our political process?
Well, again, this is my opinion, but having looked back over the impeachments that have occurred throughout the history of the United States, bribing somebody or attempting to get a benefit out of the office by asking for somebody for a favor is clearly an impeachable offense. In fact, of the people that have been impeached, half of them were convicted of that in their impeachment proceedings. So clearly asking a foreign leader if it's going to benefit the president. Now, if it's going to benefit other things, it may be a different topic, but in this particular case, because it does benefit the president directly, if it allows him to then remove his, his biggest competitor, which is Joe Biden, I think if it can be proved, that's really going to be a problem. But you are definitely right about the concerns about security. And another kind of side note on this is the issue of whistleblowers, because the whistleblower also has the right to privacy under federal law. So the whistleblower that President Trump wants to ask for the name of and be able to explore their background and whatever, it's by federal law, they're not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to have the identity of the whistleblower. So we're trying to get transparency on the one hand, but staying completely opaque on the other hand. And I think that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, now we have two whistleblowers. The one apparently was sort of hearsay, second and third hand information. The latest one apparently may have been on the inside of that phone call, but neither one obviously have been identified yet. So what you're saying is an impeachable offense, the fact that he did ask a foreign leader to investigate a political rival, that in itself could be an impeachable offense, in addition to the fact some have said he delayed funding in exchange for that.
And that's the emoluments clause. So that's the actually getting a personal benefit.
Right.
Getting rid of your competitor, and you're basically using it as a kickback or as an attempt to bribe a country to do something. And those clearly fall within impeachable offenses, at least according to the history of the United States. As I said, more than half of the cases have involved that type of behavior.
The last word on this tonight, because we could go on and on, has to do with in future conversations, this president or any other, when they're having a conversation with foreign leaders who think that some of their conversations are not going to be private, it's going to be out there for the entire world, do we run the risk of just severing those relationships, or foreign leaders just not willing to discuss things that need to be discussed in private?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's the result of it. Or else they're going to find a way to do it that's not going to be traced. And so you're not going to have any type of transparency, then it's going to become even more opaque.
Right.
And so that's really the risk that we're playing here. And you've already been seeing some pulling back by several of the world leaders who, the Finnish Prime Minister, for example, who was horribly embarrassed by being with President Trump while this was being talked about, and has basically refused to even talk about any of the topic. He's going to really lose that ability that we need to be able to communicate with our partners in the world.
Puts them in a very uncomfortable position to
Yeah,
say.
it does.
Well, a lot more in the future, that's for sure. Thanks for your perspective, always great, and I'm going to have you back on again in the future.
Appreciate being here.
Okay. Up next, there is a mental health crisis in our state, and our next guest will help us better understand what's going on and what you can do to help. But first, we'd like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here in the follow-up. Join our conversation by visiting our website at deltabroadcasting.org/thefollowup, or hit me up on social media via Facebook and Twitter. Go to facebook.com/QTVFollowup, and on Twitter at QTVFollowup. And that's not all. Drop us an email at thefollowup@delta.edu, or you can record a comment or question on our follow-up hotline for next week's show. That's 1-877-430-8989. So join the conversation at The Follow-Up. We really want to hear from you. Welcome back to The Follow-Up. It's Mental Illness Awareness Week, and a local group is working on the front lines to take on this problem head on, because we have a serious mental health crisis on our hands. For example, did you know 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year? 1 in 25 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness each year. 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34. And that's just really a snapshot of the problem. So what's being done about it here locally? Matt Samocki is with the Great Lakes Bay Region Mental Health Partnership. Thanks for coming in, Matt.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
So those are sobering statistics, to say the least. Another one I didn't mention was that suicide rates in Michigan hit a record high in 2017, and they're up 50% since 1999. So in a nutshell, what's happening here?
Right. So when we look at those statistics, it's very clear that there's a problem. And with the Great Lakes Bay Region Mental Health Partnership, really what we're focusing on is to proactively collaborate with all stakeholders to really address the mental health crisis in the Great Lakes Bay region. And specifically, when we're dealing with any mental illness, that could range from day-to-day depression to suicidal ideation, we're really looking to reduce stigmas surrounding mental illness, increase the information available and resources available to people who are really looking to get help if they're able to overcome the stigma related to mental illness, And really then at that point, if they're able to find maybe a provider that they could go to, can they actually get access to the provider? And that could be a number of things. That could be the time it takes to see a provider. It could be transportation issues, cost, insurance, et cetera. And then if they make it through all of those different hurdles, are they receiving quality care? And that's really what we're focusing on in the region.
I'm going to come back to stigmas in a moment, but I'm going to jump on some key facts in that there are a shortage of licensed mental health providers and there's a shortage of beds, right? So talk to me about that. Where's that happening? Is it in our region, and what effect is that having on people trying to get the help that they need?
Right, so that's just not a problem that's out there, that's statewide or nationwide. I mean, that is occurring everywhere, and specifically it's occurring here as well. So within our region itself, we're short 311 licensed mental health providers, and we are short 225 inpatient psychiatric care beds for people to get help. So when we start looking at those statistics and trying to figure out, what can we do to help, really address that provider shortage and the lack of inpatient beds. Those are some of the key pieces that we have our working groups that are working on, that there are other stakeholders across the region we know that are proactively working on this. And the really beautiful thing about being in this role and working across health systems and public and private providers and schools and businesses is we're able to work with and coordinate and figure out, what are people doing? What are the gaps that exist? How are they being addressed, or are they being addressed at all?
So when I talk about stigmas and myths, there's a number. I mean, I would throw this out. Maybe there's people don't understand what a mental health sort of issue is, whether it's minor or very serious. It runs the gamut, right? It all fits. Could be anxiety, it could be depression, right? Is that one of the sort of things that we're dealing with?
Absolutely. So we call it our problem pipeline. And if we're really looking at the first step to address, maybe it's someone in your family or a coworker, a colleague that you know of, stigma is really that first hurdle that needs to be overcome for people that are really going to be taking that next step to be seeking the help that they need. And we want to make sure that we are encouraging people to talk, communicate, reach out to a family member, a friend, a coworker, and ask, where can they get help? Do they have a story to tell? Is there someone that they know? And once those lines of communication open, what I've seen so far in this role, it's a really beautiful thing because people are then connected to one another and they know that it's authentic, it's true, it's honest, and that there's a lot of people that are really suffering with mental health in the region.
And is part of it that people don't want to talk about it? They want to sweep it under the rug, out of the rug? Do they feel there's some shame to do with that, or that it's a weakness? And you've got to find a way for people, let's have some dialogue, let's get it out there. And your neighbor's going through it, you have a family member going through it. You're not alone. This is happening all over the place.
Right, absolutely.
Right.
So, and I think that's one of the things, maybe growing up, where I was taught, or when friends were talking about different things related to mental health, that maybe it was seen as a weakness if you were to say that you were anxious about something or you were stressed out. And obviously, again, we're talking about any mental illness, so that range can go very far from everyday depression to suicidal ideation. But really being able to overcome that and knowing that asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. And that's really that first step to open the door to being able to get the resources and help that people need.
Speaking of a particular family that went through this, it was the tragic story involving Chad Dunn. So talk to us a little bit about Chad, how that sort of inspired his family and sort of the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So the family and friends of Chad William Dunn really came together after Chad died by suicide as a result of mental illness in 2013. And the family was really inspired to take that grief and make it into a positive change, to really look at a comprehensive approach to address mental health regionally and what could they do to help make that type of change. And since that time of Chad's death until now, the family's been extremely passionate and authentic and all in on making a change. And that's led to the creation of the Great Lakes Bay Region Mental Health Partnership. Along the way, the Dunn family connected with Rob Valentine from the Dow Chemical Company Foundation, Dr. George Cacano from CMU College of Medicine, Dr. Furhut Jansen, who's a psychiatrist, is also on our steering team, along with Kim Cosberg, who's Dave Dunn's daughter. And then also very important is the connection to the University of Michigan Depression Center and Dr. John Graydon, who founded U of M Depression Center and the National Network of Depression Centers. And through all those connections over those 5 years came the Great Lakes Bay Region Mental Health Partnership, which was unanimously approved as an initiative within the Great Lakes Bay Regional Alliance early in 2018.
So about mid 2018, it sort of got rolling. It sounds like you've accomplished a lot in a short period of time. So tell us about, you've got 7 work groups, you've got 60 organizations. So let's talk a little bit more fully about what's going on there, what kind of a volunteer support you have and others.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first initiatives or projects that we were working on was pulling stakeholders together from all different counties and all different diverse groups. And it was called Addressing the Mental Health Crisis in the Great Lakes Bay Region. The first convening was held in November 2018, and the second was in February 2019, which was a continuation of November. And really through those 150 plus people who came, again represented, at that time it was more than 66 organizations that were represented at the workshops. Really, we were working across the 4 problems of stigma, information access, and quality, and across all demographic groups, including mental health providers themselves, and looking at what initiatives could we create to help folks in the region. So from that then, at this point, we have 2 youth work groups. One is youth information. That includes right now an iMatter toolkit that we've helped create, which has been distributed to 65,000 plus students across 8 different counties. There's a youth prevention group, which is focusing a lot on social and emotional learning, developmental assets, and growth mindset. We have a stigma campaign, which is hopefully going to be underway soon. Again, using a lot of the same language that's in the iMatter toolkit, which includes helplines and those types of things. A mental health workplace program, which was really started by J.W. Fisher and Fisher Contracting Company, who have been really proactive in terms of promoting their EAP for mental health for their workers and for their families, also including new employee orientation, supervisor trainings, just really great things that they're doing, and we look to scale that to other businesses and make it available in 2020 as well. Working Adult Wellness Group, which is looking to adapt really what we've put together for K-12 schools and make that available to employers and employees. That contains a number of resources to help those working adults. And a mental health provider community. That was a big push, and we had our first event a few weeks ago where we pulled together about 60 providers across all licenses and organizations, and the feedback's been great so far. Really been able to network and get to know others that maybe they never would have an opportunity to. That could potentially lead to lunch and learns, a mental health summit. The opportunities are really endless with that. And then our mental health provider wellness group, which is really looking at a way to make EAPs available to nonprofits and maybe private providers who maybe currently can't afford an EAP, but really being able to make that much more available so they can get help and services that they need as well, because providers themselves suffer from vicarious or secondary trauma based on those people that they see every day who are struggling.
What I found interesting, when you and I talked in advance of you coming on, you don't really have a blueprint or a model to go from, right? I mean, this is unique to this region, which is amazing in itself. How have you been able to pull this together so fast?
Well, it's been the collaboration, right?
Okay.
So, and that's been the great thing is coming in and saying we're going to try something new. The hospital systems, different nonprofits, businesses, they've all been extremely supportive because they know there's a
Sure.
problem, and they know that we want to help coordinate and help address the problem. There's pockets of really great, wonderful things going on. We know that we can expand those and make those even better. But like you said, before I came on in this position, the Dunn family and they were doing a lot of research and saying, okay, what's a model that we could take from Arkansas or California and implement here? They don't really exist in this regional, type approach. And Dr. Graydon at University of Michigan Depression Center, he's been across the country and really across the world. He hasn't seen anything like this either, in such a community-based collaborative approach to addressing mental health crisis. So it is unique, and it is a really nice blueprint that hopefully we can help replicate throughout the state or throughout different parts of the country as well.
Yeah, given the gravity of the situation, I mean, it's long overdue, that's for sure. One other thing I'm going to touch on quickly, the community mapping. What is that about?
So community mapping is part of our mental health ecosystem. So the mental health ecosystem is really to understand where are the services that are available if someone is seeking mental health care. What insurances do each of the organizations provide? If they were to go to see a specific provider, you know, do they have a specialty? What does that entail? And in that avenue as well, we can communicate with them because we have their contact information and pull them in and ask them to engage. And that was one of the first big undertakings is we may know what was going on in Saginaw, maybe in Midland, maybe partially Bay County, maybe not Isabella, and really being able to pull that all together and use that for ourselves to communicate and organize and collaborate, but also then for people that may be looking for services themselves. And that's only one piece of our ecosystem. We're looking to develop strategy mapping, resource hub. We have a number of infographics and a data dashboard that have been built specific to the region so far as well. So that was a key component really to get fully marinated and immersed in mental health in this region.
Sure. Well, speaking of resources, because I don't want you to go in about a minute and a half that we have some contact numbers that I want our viewers to see right there. So help me with that. SAMHSA's helpline. SAMHSA is what?
SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, and they provide a number of different resources. One of those, they have a couple of different helplines. They have one that's a suicide helpline and one this is more of a crisis helpline itself. And if someone's going to call this number, they will get in touch with someone and that person will guide them to a provider in this region.
Okay.
And then the crisis text line, that's an organization that started in the US, it's now international. The keyword belong, if you were to text on your phones right now, text belong to 741-741. On your phone, you would be put in touch with someone who would be able to, again, be able to put you in touch with the resources that you need. Okay,
and of course, you're connected to the Great Lakes Bay Regional Alliance, but you're at the Great Lakes Bay. Let's put that up one more time. Any information on the website is the Great Lakes Bay Mental Health.com. So that's awesome. Hey, thanks for coming in. Great stuff, important information, and remember, it's Mental Illness Awareness Week, and it's affecting a lot of us. So. Thanks for joining us tonight, everyone. We'll see you back here tomorrow, actually next Tuesday night at 8 o'clock.